Barcelona did not sign Anthony Gordon to entertain Europe. They signed him to suffocate it. Because modern football is changing. Slowly. Violently. The era of passive possession football is dying, and Hansi Flick knows it better than anyone. He does not just want wingers who can dribble beautifully or hold width near the touchline anymore. He wants runners, pressers, attackers who make defenders panic before the ball even arrives. And that is exactly why Anthony Gordon suddenly became one of the most controversial signings in European football. What makes Gordon dangerous is not simply his speed. Plenty of players are fast. What makes him different is the psychological violence in the way he plays. He presses like a player trying to humiliate you. He runs like someone personally offended by the idea of losing the ball. Every sprint feels aggressive. Every duel feels emotional. Defenders do not just get tired against Anthony Gordon. They start rushing passes, making mistakes, losing confidence. And somewhere inside Barcelona, Hansi Flick looked at all of that chaos and saw the perfect weapon for the future of his football. But outside the club, almost nobody understood the vision. In fact, many people believed Barcelona had just made a massive mistake. The moment Barcelona pushed aggressively to sign Anthony Gordon, the reaction across Europe was immediate confusion. For years, Barcelona built their identity around elegance, around technical brilliance, around players who made football look artistic. So when reports started linking them with a winger known more for pressing intensity than silky dribbling, many people genuinely thought the club had lost its mind. Some fans looked at the price tag and saw panic. Others looked at Gordon himself and simply did not see a Barcelona player. He was not Neymar, not Lamine Yamal, not the kind of winger who makes highlight reels with him. Critics called him limited, too emotional, too chaotic. Some even argued he was nothing more than a system player benefiting from Newcastle's intensity under Eddie Howe. And honestly, on the surface, those doubts made sense. Because when most people think about Barcelona, they imagine control, patience, beauty. But Hansi Flick is trying to build something very different, something more aggressive, more vertical, more ruthless. He does not want attackers who wait for the game to come to them. He wants players who force mistakes, players who turn football into pressure, into exhaustion, into fear. That is why Gordon fascinated him so much. Because Flick was not looking at what Anthony Gordon had been. He was looking at what modern football was becoming. But to understand why Barcelona became so obsessed with him, you have to go back to the beginning. Before the chaos, before the controversy, and before Anthony Gordon became one of the most emotionally dangerous players in English football. Long before Barcelona saw Anthony Gordon as the future of Hansi Flick's revolution, he was just a skinny kid in Liverpool trying to survive inside a football system that had already decided he was not good enough. And somehow, that rejection never really left him. Growing up in a city completely obsessed with football, Gordon's dream was simple: play for Liverpool. His family supported Liverpool. His childhood revolved around Liverpool. Everything pointed toward Anfield becoming the center of his future. When he joined the academy as a young boy, it felt like the dream had already begun. But then football reminded him how brutal it can be. At only 11 years old, Liverpool released him. Not because he lacked passion, not because he lacked technical ability. They believed he was simply too small, too weak physically, too underdeveloped to survive elite football. And for a child completely consumed by the game, that kind of rejection changes something inside you. Suddenly, football stops feeling magical. It becomes personal. Most young players disappear after moments like that. Gordon did the opposite. Away from elite academies, he dropped back into grassroots football and started rebuilding himself from nothing. That period quietly shaped the player Barcelona would later become obsessed with. Because while other academy prospects were learning structure and patience, Gordon was developing anger, aggression, fearlessness. He played like somebody trying to prove a point every single time he touched the ball. Everton eventually gave him a second chance, but even there, the doubts never fully disappeared. Coaches still questioned his mentality, his decision-making, his physical profile. Yet the more people questioned him, the harder he pushed back. Slowly, the rejected Liverpool kid started forcing people to notice him. And by the time he broke into Everton's first team, Anthony Gordon already carried something dangerous inside him. The obsession of a player who never forgot what rejection felt like. If Everton helped create Anthony Gordon, they also nearly destroyed him. By the 2021-2022 season, the club was collapsing in real time. Managers changed constantly. Results became disastrous. The atmosphere around Goodison Park turned toxic. Every week felt heavier than the last. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, one of the youngest players in the squad, suddenly became one of the emotional faces of Everton's survival battle. At first, fans loved him for it. Not because he was scoring 20 goals a season, not because he looked polished technically. They loved the anger in his football. Gordon sprinted after lost causes like his career depended on it. He pressed defenders recklessly. He played every match with visible emotion, and in a broken Everton side filled with fear and hesitation. Supporters connected deeply with that intensity. But football changes fast when expectations arrive. Everything started becoming unstable the moment Chelsea pushed aggressively to sign him for a massive fee. Suddenly, Anthony Gordon was no longer viewed as a hard-working academy kid. Fans expected him to become Everton's star player overnight. The pressure exploded around him, and his performances started collapsing under the weight of it. The goals disappeared, the assists disappeared, his decision-making became erratic. Supporters accused him of forcing everything, trying too hard, playing emotionally instead of intelligently. Week after week, the criticism became uglier, more personal, more hostile. Then came the breaking point. After a humiliating loss to Southampton during Everton's relegation crisis, furious supporters surrounded Gordon's car outside Goodison Park. The images spread everywhere. One of the club's own academy products had become a symbol of frustration and betrayal inside his own city. From that moment forward, the relationship never recovered. Gordon felt isolated, scapegoated, abandoned, and once he decided he wanted to leave, the situation completely exploded. He stopped training, forced the move, burned whatever connection remained with Everton supporters. Across England, many people suddenly saw Anthony Gordon as selfish, arrogant, and emotionally unstable. But what nobody realized at the time was that all of this chaos was slowly turning him into the exact type of player Hansi Flick would later fall in love with. Newcastle United did not try to calm Anthony Gordon down. They weaponized him. When he arrived at St. James's Park, most people still focused on the controversy surrounding him. The toxic Everton exit, the emotional outbursts, the inconsistency. Even many Newcastle supporters questioned whether the club had massively overpaid for a winger carrying so much baggage. But Eddie Howe saw something deeper underneath all the chaos. He saw a player built perfectly for intensity football. Instead of forcing Gordon to become more cautious or controlled, Howe leaned directly into the aggression that had always defined him. He encouraged the pressing, the relentless running, the emotional energy. Suddenly, Gordon was no longer being judged purely on goals and assists. He became one of the engines of Newcastle's entire system, and for the first time in his career, everything started making sense. The transformation became even more obvious with England's under 2-1 team under Lee Carsley. Rather than using Gordon as a traditional winger, isolated near the touchline, Carsley moved him into more central attacking positions, where his movement, pressing, and direct running became devastating. Gordon stopped looking like a chaotic young talent and started looking like a modern elite attacker. That shift changed him psychologically too. For years, Anthony Gordon played like somebody desperate to prove he belonged. Now he finally started believing it himself. His performances exploded. The confidence grew. Defenders struggled to deal with the constant pressure he created without the ball. Newcastle's attack suddenly became faster, more vertical, and far more aggressive whenever he played. But more importantly, Gordon had finally found an environment that understood him. Not as a polished football artist, not as a traditional Barcelona-style winger, but as something modern football is beginning to value more and more every season, an emotional pressing machine capable of physically and mentally overwhelming opponents. And somewhere in Spain, Hansi Flick was paying very close attention. The reason Hansi Flick became obsessed with Anthony Gordon has very little to do with traditional Barcelona football. In fact, that is exactly why this transfer feels so important. For years, Barcelona built their identity around control. They wanted to dominate matches through possession, technical superiority, and positional perfection. Opponents were suffocated slowly, carefully, almost elegantly. But Flick's vision is far more aggressive than that. He wants football played at a pace where defenders stop thinking clearly, where pressure feels constant, violent, exhausting. And Anthony Gordon fits that vision almost perfectly, because Gordon does not play like a winger waiting for the ball to arrive at his feet. He attacks space relentlessly. He presses center backs like a striker. He tracks runners like a fullback. The moment possession changes, his first instinct is not to slow the game down, it is to accelerate chaos. That mentality is exactly what modern football is rewarding right now. The best teams in Europe no longer just dominate technically, they dominate physically and psychologically. They force mistakes high up the pitch. They overwhelm opponents emotionally before they overwhelm them tactically. And Gordon may be one of the most emotionally intense attackers in European football. What makes him especially dangerous inside Flick's system is how his movement affects defenders mentally. Gordon never stops running, never stops pressing, never stops attacking gaps behind the back line. Fullbacks slowly become uncomfortable against him because every second feels stressful. One lapse in concentration and he is already sprinting into space behind you. That is why Flick sees him differently than most people do. While critics still focus on whether Gordon is beautiful enough for Barcelona, Flick sees a player capable of transforming the emotional rhythm of matches. He sees somebody who can turn controlled games into chaos within seconds. Somebody who can make Barcelona physically terrifying again. And honestly, that may be the most shocking part of this entire story. Because Barcelona are no longer trying to become the most artistic team in Europe. Under Hansi Flick, they are trying to become the team nobody can survive against physically. And Anthony Gordon may end up becoming the perfect symbol of that transformation. But the same intensity that makes Anthony Gordon so dangerous may also be the biggest threat to his future at Barcelona. Because throughout his entire career, Gordon has always played football on the edge emotionally. Sometimes that fire makes him unstoppable. Other times, it completely consumes him. Even during the best periods of his rise at Newcastle, the warning signs never fully disappeared. There were moments where frustration controlled him more than logic. Rash decisions, emotional reactions, unnecessary confrontations. At times, Gordon looked less like a calm elite attacker and more like somebody constantly fighting battles inside his own head. And that becomes incredibly dangerous at a club like Barcelona. This is not Newcastle. The pressure is bigger. The media is more aggressive. Every bad performance becomes national news. Every emotional reaction gets magnified instantly. Barcelona can elevate players into global superstars, but it can also psychologically destroy them. The club has done both many times before. That is why some people inside football still have serious concerns about this move. Not because Gordon lacks talent, not because he lacks work ethic, but because emotional intensity is difficult to control once expectations become overwhelming, and Barcelona is one of the most emotionally exhausting environments in world football. The scary part is that Gordon almost needs that emotional chaos to play at his best. The anger, the aggression, the obsession. That energy fuels him. It always has. But if that intensity ever turns against the team instead of for it, Barcelona could quickly discover that the weapon Flick wanted so badly might also be impossible to control. Anthony Gordon's journey to Barcelona was never supposed to happen like this. He was the kid Liverpool threw away for being too small. The young winger Everton supporters once adored before turning against completely. The emotionally explosive talent many people believed would eventually collapse under pressure. For years, his career felt unstable, chaotic, constantly one bad moment away from falling apart. And yet somehow, every time football tried to push him backward, he came back even more aggressive than before. That resilience is exactly why Hansi Flick fought so hard to bring him to Barcelona. Because Flick does not see Gordon as a traditional winger, he sees him as the future of modern football intensity, a player capable of turning matches into physical and psychological warfare. Someone who can make defenders panic before Barcelona even enters the final third. And maybe that is the biggest sign that football itself is changing. The old Barcelona wanted artists, players who controlled games with beauty and patience. Flick's Barcelona wants runners, pressers, attackers who suffocate opponents emotionally, and Anthony Gordon may become the clearest symbol yet of that transformation, which is honestly terrifying for the rest of Europe. Because if a player built almost entirely from rejection, anger, and obsession finally finds the perfect tactical environment for his chaos, then Barcelona may not have just signed Anthony Gordon. They may have created a monster that modern football is no longer prepared to stop.